and it's getting closer now to some desperately needed financial aid.
Yeah, while all the other developments are panning out there, the International Monetary Fund is stepping up, saying that it's ready to provide the financial lifeline that Kiev has been calling for. The new prime minister says the government there needs some $35 billion in international assistance. Kiev already owes $13 billion in state debt payments this year. State reserves have shrunk to less than $18 billion. Now, the U.S. and EU have said that together they'll guarantee about $2.5 billion worth of loans. The IMF has not specified what kind of amount it would be interested in lending, but it will be sending a team to launch preliminary negotiations. And that itself is seen as a sort of de facto recognition of the fledgling interim government. Here's the IMF spokesman.
We can work with transition governments, we can work with interim governments, and the issue for us is a government that is internationally recognized, and we have no reason to believe that the recognition is an issue in this case.
Now, amid those developments, we saw Ukraine's currency hitting a 10-year low this Thursday. Switzerland saying that it, in theory, would be prepared to freeze any assets held by the ousted President Viktor Yanukovych, any assets that he might hold in Swiss banks. Let's take a look at the markets now. On Wall Street, we saw the S&P 500 closing at a new record high on Thursday, crossing that key level of 1,850. That takes it into positive territory for the year. A mixed picture on the Asian markets to end the trading week here. The Nikkei closing down about 0.5%. This despite some pretty strong data coming out about Japan's economy. Factory output rose 4% in January, its fastest pace in 4 years. Core inflation rose 1.3%, that close to a 5-year high. And all eyes on a 3% tax hike that's due to take effect in April. Everyone's going to be watching to see how that affects the world's third largest economy.
Well, speaking of the second largest economy now, we've been talking a lot about how François Hollande's African tour, his stop in Nigeria, was intended in part to increase French investment in Africa's second largest country, that is Nigeria.
Yeah, but France, still lags behind a lot of other countries in African investment, at least outside of its former colonies. And with English-speaking countries taking up more and more of Africa's GDP, it still has some catching up to do. Oliver Farry explains.
This offshore oil platform owned by Total is the flagship of French investment in Nigeria. The oil giant has invested much in the Central African country, the most populous on the continent. But beyond the oil industry, few French companies have ventured into Nigeria's dynamic market. Africa expert Antoine Glaser says France is too focused on its former colonies.
There's a whole load of French companies in Ivory Coast, 500, 600, but only 20 large French companies in Nigeria.
And French-speaking Africa does not have much economic clout, constituting only 19% of Africa's GDP, while English-speaking countries make up almost half the continent's wealth. And it's getting bigger. Other than Nigeria, which boasts a robust growth of 7% per annum, there's spectacular growth too in Ghana, Uganda and Ethiopia. But Alexandre Villegrand, who represents French companies operating in Africa, says France remains a key player.
Of course, we're losing market share, but in terms of volume, we're progressing. You're better off having a quarter of a 3-foot wide apple pie than half of one that's 8 inches wide. It's a simple calculation.
François Hollande's speech in Abuja showed France was willing, but the reality is it has little money to grant companies wishing to set up in a country as hard to access as Nigeria.
And that's it, unfortunately, for this edition of the Business News. Thank you very much, Kate Moody. Time now for our daily visit to the Paris International